In the deepest depths of Stirling University lies a man who ponders important questions. Not questions like, what's the meaning of life, or why are we here? But questions that center over one concept. How do I scare my audience? Tonight, he will answer that question, reading tales that are so utterly horrifying they may leave you weak at the knees. Welcome to the Spook Zone.
Ladies, gentlemen, other eldritch abominations, I welcome you to the Spook Zone. In fact, the final show of the semester before Christmas break, and everybody's doing their own thing. And by the way, if you are an eldritch abomination for whatever reason, could you give back Santa, please? He's been missing for a long time. Like, we all noticed, our childhoods have been dead for a very long time now, and that's the only explanation. It's the only thing that can make me feel better. If you should just give him back. He's not dead. I know he's not dead. Okay. So, what have we got on the agenda today? Apart from, of course, Lovecraft, which I am reading from, the commemorative edition of the Necronomicon, the best weird tales of H.P. Lovecraft. It's pretty good. A lot of Lovecraftian tales. Here's how big it is. You've probably heard that before if you've been on the show as much as I have, which is all the time. But what exactly are we reading from Lovecraft? Well, as I said last time, we're going to begin with a rather large story, which may mean I will have to save the rest of it for after the term, but I'm sure you can wait that long. This is a big old story about a guy who knows how to bring the dead back to life, or at least trying, and perhaps failing, depending on how the story goes. I don't really know that much about it. All I've seen is a Wikipedia article which is like, Herbert West is a guy who tried to reanimate things. There's not much of a description in there. Either way, I think it'll be a fun time, regardless of whether or not we get through all of it, or just like half of it, or 3/4, or whatever amount of this we get through. We'll enjoy ourselves, because it'll be adequately spooky, as Lovecraft tend to do, and he's not over-explaining everything and just going on and on. Anyway, with that in mind, let's get right down to business. This is Herbert West, Reanimator. Part 1. From the Dark. Of Herbert West, who was my friend in college, and in other life, I can speak only with extreme terror. This terror is not due altogether to the sinister manner of his recent disappearance, but was engendered by the whole nature of his life work, and first gained its acute form more than 17 years ago, when we were in the third year of our course at the Miskatonic University Medical School in Arkham. While he was with me, the wonder and diabolism of his experiments fascinated me utterly, and I was his closest companion. Now that he is gone and the spell is broken, the actual fear is greater. Memories and possibilities are ever more hideous than realities. The first horrible incident of our acquaintance was the greatest shock I ever experienced, and it is only with reluctance that I repeat it. As I've said, it happened when we were in medical school, where West had already made himself notorious through his wild theories on the nature of death, and the possibility of overcoming it artificially. His views, which were widely ridiculed by the faculty and by his fellow students, hinged on the essentially mechanistic nature of life, and concerned means for operating the organic machinery of mankind by calculated chemical action after the failure of natural processes. In his experiments with various animating solutions, he had killed and treated immense numbers of rabbits, guinea pigs, cats, dogs, and monkeys, till he had become the prime nuisance of the college. Several times he had actually obtained signs of life in animals supposedly dead. In many cases, violent signs, but he soon saw the perfection of his process, if indeed possible, would necessarily involve a lifetime of research. It likewise became clear that, since the solution never worked alike on different organic species, he'd require human subjects for further and more specialized process. It was here that he first came into conflict with the college authorities, and was debarred from future experiments by no less a dignitary than the dean of the medical school himself, the learned and benevolent Dr. Alan Halesley, whose work on behalf of the stricken is recalled by every old resident of Arkham. I had always been exceptionally tolerant of West's pursuits, and we frequently discussed his theories whose ramifications and corollaries were almost infinite. Holding with Haeckel that all life is chemical and physical process, that the so-called soul is a myth, my friend believed that the artificial reanimation of the dead can depend only on the condition of the tissues, and that useless unless actual decomposition has set in. A corpse fully equipped with organs may, with suitable measures, be set going again in the peculiar fashion known as life. That the psychic or intellectual life might be impaired by the slight deterioration of the sensitive brain cells, which even a short period of death would apt to cause, West fully realized. It had first been his hope to find a regent which would restore vitality before the actual advent of death, and only repeated failures on animals had shown him that the natural and artificial life motions were incomplete. He then sought extreme freshness in his specimens, injecting his solutions into the blood immediately after the extinction of life. It was this circumstance which made the professors so carelessly skeptical, for they felt that true death had not occurred in any case. They did not seem and stop to view the matter closely and reasoningly. It was not long after the faculty had interdicted his work that West confided to me his resolution to get fresh bodies in some manner, and continue in secret the experiments he could no longer perform openly. To hear him discuss ways and means was rather ghastly, for at the college we had never procured anatomical specimens ourselves. Whatever the morgue proved inadequate, 2 local Negroes attended to this matter, and they were seldom questioned. West was then a small, slender, spectacled youth with delicate features, yellow hair, pale blue eyes, and a soft voice, and it was uncanny to hear him dwelling on the relative merits of Christ Church Cemetery and the Potter's Field, because practically everybody in Christ Church was embalmed. A thing, of course, ruinous to West's researches. I was by this time his active and enthralled assistant, and helped him make all his decisions, not only concerning the source of bodies, but concerning a suitable place for our loathsome work. It was I who thought of the deserted Chapman farmhouse beyond Meadow Hill, where we fitted up on the ground floor an operating room and a laboratory, each with dark curtains to conceal our midnight doings. The place was far from any road, and in sight of no other house, yet precautions were nonetheless necessary, since rumors of strange lights, started by chance, nocturnal rumors, would soon bring disaster on our enterprise. It was agreed to call the whole thing a chemical laboratory if discovery should occur. Gradually, we equipped our sinister haunt of science with materials either purchased in Boston or quietly borrowed from the college. Materials carefully made unrecognizable save to expert eyes, and provided spades and picks for the many burials we should have to make in the cellar. At the college we used an incinerator, but the apparatus was too costly for our unauthorized laboratory, and bodies were always a nuisance, even the small guinea pig bodies from the slight clandestine experiments in West's room at the boarding house. We followed the local death notices like ghouls, for our specimens demanded particular qualities. What we wanted were corpses interned soon after death and without any artificial preservation, preferably free from malforming disease, certainly with organs present. accident victims were our best hope. Not for many weeks did we hear of anything suitable, though we talked with morgue and hospital authorities, ostensibly in the college's interest, as often as we could without exciting suspicion. We found that the college had first choice in every case, so that it might be necessary to remain in Arkham during the summer, when only the limited summer school classes were held. In the end, though, luck favored us, for one day we heard of an almost ideal case in the Potter's Field, a brawny young workman, drowned only in the morning before in Summer's Pond, and buried at the town's expense without delay or embalming. That afternoon we found the new grave, and determined to begin work soon after midnight. It was a repulsive task that we undertook in the black, small hours, even though we lacked, at that time, the special horror of graveyards which later experiences brought to us. We carried spades and oil-dark lanterns, for although electronic torches were manufactured, they were not as satisfactory as the tungsten contrivances of today. Contrivances, that's the word. Yeah. The process of unearthing was slow and sordid. It might have been gruesomely poetical if we had been artists instead of scientists, and we were glad when our spade struck wood. When the pine box was fully uncovered, West scrambled down and removed the lid, dragging out and propping up the contents. I reached down and hauled the contents out of the grave, and then both toiled hard to restore the spot to its former appearance. The affair made us rather nervous, especially the stiff form and vacant face of our first trophy. But we managed to remove all traces of our visit. When we had patted down the last shovelful of earth, we put the specimen in a canvas sack and set out for the old Chapman place beyond Meadow Hill. On an improvised dissecting table in the old farmhouse by the light of a powerful oh my gosh, that's a fun one. Acetylene lamp, there it is. The specimen was not very spectral looking. It had been sturdy and apparently an imaginable youth of wholesome plebeian type, large-framed, grey-eyed and brown-haired. A sound animal without psychological subtitles. And probably having the vital process of the simplest and healthiest sort. Now, with the eyes closed, it looked more asleep than dead, though the expert test of my friend soon left no doubt on the score. We had at last what West had always longed for. A real dead man of the ideal kind, ready for the solution, prepared according to the most careful calculations and theories for human use. The tension on our part became very great. We knew that there was scarcely a chance for anything like complete success, and could not avoid hideous fears as possible grotesque results of partial animation. Especially were we apprehensive concerning the mind and pulses of the creature, since, in the space following death, some of the more delicate cerebral cells might have suffered deterioration. I myself still held some curious notions about the traditional soul of man, and felt an awe at the secrets that might be told from one returning from the dead. I wondered what sights this placid youth might have seen in inaccessible spheres, and what he could relate in, if fully restored to life. But my wonder was not overwhelming, since, for the most part, I shared the materialism of my friend. He was calmer than I, as he forced a large quantity of his fluid into the vein of the body's arm, immediately binding the incision securely. The waiting was gruesome, but West never faltered. Every now and then, he applied his stethoscope to the specimen and bored the negative results philosophically. After 3/4 of an hour without the least sign of life, he disappointedly pronounced the solution inadequate, but determined to make the most of this opportunity and try one change in the formula before dismissing of his ghastly prize. We had that afternoon dug a grave in the cellar, and would have to fill it by dawn, for although he had a fixed look on the house, we wished to shun even the most remote risk of ghoulish discovery. Besides, the body would not even approximately be fresh the next night. So, taking the solitary actine lamp into the adjacent laboratory, we left our silent guest on the slab in the dark, and bent every energy to the mixing of a new solution, the weighing and measuring supervised by West with an almost fanatical care. The awful event was very sudden and wholly unexpected. I was pouring something from one test tube to the other, and West was busy over the alcohol blast lamp, which had to answer for a Bunsen burner in this gasless edifice, when from the pitch-black room we had left there burst the most appalling and demonic succession of cries that either of us had ever heard. Not more unutterable could have been the chaos of hellish sound if the pit itself had opened to release the agony of the damned, for in one inconceivable cacophony was centered all the supernal terror and unnatural despair of animate nature. Human it could not have been. It is not in man to make such sounds, and without a thought of our late employment or its possible discovery, both West and I leapt to the nearest window like stricken animals, overturning tubes, lamp, and retorts, and vaulting madly into the stirred abyss of the rural night. I think we screamed ourselves as we scrambled frantically towards the town, though as we reached the outskirts we put on a semblance of restraint, just enough to seem like belated revelers staggering home from a debauch. We did not separate it, but managed to get to West's room, where we whispered with the gas up until dawn. By then, we had calmed ourselves a little with rational theories and plans for investigation so that we could sleep through the day, classes being disregarded. But that evening, 2 items in the paper, wholly unrelated, made it again impossible for us to sleep. The old deserted Chapman house had been inexplicably burned to an amorphous heap of ashes that we could understand because of the upset lamp. Also, an attempt had been made to disturb a new grave in the potter's field, as if by futile and spadeless clawing at the earth. That we could not understand, for we had patted down the mound very carefully. And for 17 years after that, West would look frequently over his shoulder and complain of fancied footsteps behind him. Now he has disappeared. Part 2. The Plague Demon. I shall never forget that hideous summer 16 years ago, when, like a noxious Afrite from the halls of Eblis, typhoid stalked leeringly through Arkham. It is by that satanic scourge that most recall the year, for truly terror brooded with bat wings over the piles of coffins in the tombs of Christchurch Cemetery. Yet for me, there is a greater horror in that time, a horror known to me alone, now that Herbert West was disappeared. West and I were doing postgraduate work in summer classes at the medical school of Miskatonic University, and my friend had attained a wide notoriety because of his experiments leading towards the revivification of the dead. After the scientific slaughter of uncounted small animals, the freakish work had ostensibly stopped by order of the skeptical Dean Dr. Alan Halsey, though West had continued to perform certain secret tests in his dingy boarding house room. And, of course, on one terrible and unforgivable occasion, taken a human body from its grave in the Potter's Field to a deserted farmhouse beyond Meadow Hill. And I was on him, and I was with him on that odious occasion, and saw him inject the still veins, the elixir which we thought would to some extent restore life's chemical and physical processes. It had ended horribly, in a delirium of fear which we gradually came to attribute to our own overwrought nerves. And West had never afterward been able to shake off a maddening sensation of being haunted and hunted. That body had not been quite fresh enough. It is obvious that to restore normal mental attributes, a body must be very fresh indeed. And the burning of the old house had prevented us from burying the thing. It would have been better if we'd known it was on the ground. After that experience, West dropped his researches for some time. But, as the zeal of the born scientist slowly returned, he again became importunate with the college faculty, pleading for the use of the dissecting room and of fresh human specimens for the work he regarded as so overwhelmingly important. His pleas, however, were wholly in vain, for the decision of Dr. Halsey was inflexible, and the other professors all endorsed the verdict of their leader. In the radical theory of reanimation, they saw nothing but the immature vagaries of a youthful enthusiast whose slight form, yellow hair, and spectacles, blue eyes, and soft voice gave no hint of the supernormal, almost diabolical power of the cold brain within. I can see him now as he was then, and I shiver. He grew sterner of the face, but never elderly. And now Sefton has had the mishap, and West has vanished. West clashed disagreeably with Dr. Halsey near the end of our last undergraduate term in a worldly dispute that did less credit him than to the kindly dean in point of our courtesy. He felt that he was needlessly and irrationally retarded in a supremely great work. Ooh, that's a fun word. Wow. Thank you, Lovecraft. Good Lord. A work which he could of course conduct to suit himself in later years, but which he wished to begin while still possessed of the exceptional faculties of the university. That the tradition-bound elders should ignore his singular results on animals and persist in their denial of the possibility of reanimation was inexpressibly disgusting, and almost incomprehensible to a youth of West's logical temperament. Only greater maturity could help him understand the chronic mental limitations of the professor-doctor type, the product of generations of pathetic puritanism, kindly consciousness, and sometimes gentle and amiable, yet always narrow, intolerant and custom-ridden, and lacking in perspective. Age is more charity for those incomplete yet high-souled characters whose worst real vice is timidity, and who are ultimately punished by general ridicule for their intellectual sins. Sins like Calvinism and anti-Darwinism and anti-Nazism, and every sort of Sabbatarianism and sumptuary legislation. That's actually Sabbatarianism, there you go. West, young despite his marvellous scientific requirements, had scant patience with the good Dr. Halsey, and his erudite colleagues, and nursed an increasing resentment, coupled with a desire to prove his theories to those obtuse worthies in some striking and dramatic fashion. Like most youths, he indulged in elaborate daydreams of revenge, triumph, and final, magnanimous forgiveness. And then had come the scourge, grinning and lethal from the nightmare caverns of Tartarus. West and I had graduated about the time of its beginning, but had remained for additional work at the summer school, so that we were both in Arkham when it broke, with full demonic fury, upon the town. Though not yet as licensed physicians, we now had our degrees, and were pressed fanatically into public service as the numbers of the stricken grew. The situation was almost past management, and deaths ensued too frequently for the local undertakers fully to handle. Burials without embalming were made in rapid succession, and even the Christchurch cemetery receiving tomb was crammed with coffins of the unembalmed dead. This circumstance was not without effect on West, who thought often of the irony of the situation. So many fresh specimens, yet none for his persecuted researches. We were frightfully overworked, and the terrific mental and nervous strain made my friend brood morbidly. But West's gentle enemies were no less harassed with prostrating duties. College had all but closed, and every doctor of the medical facility was helping to fight the typhoid plague. Dr. Halsley, in particular, had distinguished himself in sacrificing service, applying his extreme skill with wholehearted energy to cases which many others shunned because of danger or apparent hopelessness. Before the month was over, the fearless dean had become a popular hero, though he seemed unconscious of his fame, as he struggled to keep from the collapsing with physical fatigue and nervous exhaustion. West could not withhold admiration for the fortitude of his foe, but because of this, he was even more determined to prove him the truth of his amazing doctrines. Taking advantage of the disorganization of both college work and municipal health regulations, he managed to get a recently deceased body smuggled into the university dissecting room one night, and in my presence injected a new modification of this solution. The thing actually opened its eyes, but only stared at the ceiling with a look of soul-petrifying horror before collapsing into an inertness from which nothing could rouse it. West said it was not fresh enough. The hot summer air does not favor corpses. That time, we were almost caught before we incinerated the thing, and West doubted the advisability of repeating his daring misuse of the college laboratory. The peak of the epidemic was reached in August. West and I were almost dead, and Dr. Halsley did die on the 14th. The students all attended the hasty funeral on the 15th and bought an impressive wreath, though the latter was quite overshadowed by the tribute sent by wealthy Arkham citizens and by the municipality itself. It was almost a public affair, for the dean had surely been a public benefactor. After the entombment, we were all somewhat depressed, and spent the afternoon at a bar of the commercial house, where West, though shaken by the death of his chief opponent, chilled the rest of us with references to his notorious theories. Most of the students went home or to various duties as that evening advanced, but West persuaded me to aid him on making a night of it. West's landlady saw us arrive in his room at about 2 a.m. with a third man between us, and told her husband that he all evidently dined and wined rather well. Apparently this acidulous matron was right. For about 3 a.m. the whole house was aroused from cries coming from West's room, for when they broke down the door they found the two of us unconscious on the blood-stained carpet, beaten, scratched, and mauls, with only the broken remnants of West's bottles and instruments around us. Only an open window had told us of what had become of our assailant, and many wondered how he himself had fared after the terrific leap from the second story into the lawn, which he must have made. There were some strange garments in the room, but West, upon regaining consciousness, said they did not belong to our stranger, but were specimens collected for bacteriological analysis in the course of investigations on the transmission of germ diseases. He ordered them burnt as soon as possible in the capacious fireplace. To the police we both declared ignorance of our late companion's identity. He was, West nervously said, a congenial stranger whom he had met at some downtown bar of some uncertain location. We had all been rather jovial, and West and I did not wish to have our pugnacious companion hunted down. That same night saw the beginning of the second Arkham horror, the horror that to me eclipsed the plague itself. Christ Church Cemetery was the scene of a terrible killing. A watchman, having been clawed to death in a manner not only too hideous for description, but raising a doubt as to the human agency of the deed. The victim had been seen alive considerably after midnight. The dawn revealed this unutterable thing. The manager of a circus of the neighboring town of Bolton was questioned, but he swore that no beast at any time had escaped from its cage. Those who found the body noted a trail of blood leading to the receiving tomb, where a small pool of red lay on the concrete just outside the grave. Gate, that is. A fainter trail led away towards the woods, but it soon gave out. The next night, devils danced on the roofs of Arkham, and the unnatural madness howled in the wind. Through the fevered town had crept a curse which some said was greater than the plague, and which some whispered was the embodied demon soul of the plague itself. 8 houses were ended by a nameless thing which strewed red death in its wake. In all, 17 maimed and shapeless remnants of bodies were left behind by the voiceless, sadistic monster that crept abroad. A few persons had half seen it in the dark and said it was white, and like a malformed ape or a anthropomorphic fiend. It had not left behind quite all that it had attacked, for sometimes it had been hungry, and the number it had killed was 14. 3 of the bodies had been in stricken homes, and had not been alive. On the 3rd night, frantic bands of searchers, led by the police, captured it in a house on Crane Street near the Miskatonic campus. They had organized the quest with care, keeping in touch by means of volunteer telephone stations, and when someone in the college district had reported hearing a scratching at a shattered window, the net was quickly spread. On account of the general alarm and precautions, there were only 2 more victims, and the capture was effected without major casualties. The thing was finally stopped by a bullet, though not a fatal one, and was rushed to the local hospital amidst universal excitement and loathing. For it had been a man. That much was clear despite the nauseous eyes and voiceless simianism and the demonic savagery. They dressed the wound and carted it to the asylum at Stefton, where it beat its head against the walls of a padded cell for 16 years, until the recent mishap, when it escaped under circumstances that few like to mention. What had most disgusted the searchers of Arkham was the thing they noticed when the monster's face was cleaned. The mocking, unbelievable resemblance to a learned and self-sacrificing martyr who had entombed but 3 days before the late Alan Halsley, public benefactor and dean to the medical school of the Miskatonic University. Oh dear, we've got some technical difficulties. I'm just about to finish. Maybe I just need to plug this in a little bit bigger. One moment. That's peculiar. I'm going to try the other microphone. That work? That's odd. Yeah, there's just some definite static. Oh, that's peculiar. Ooh, that's weird. Oh no, and it was just about to finish as well. Oh, what is this? Ugh. Ooh, hideous. Hideous. Oh no, that's bad. I wonder what that could be. Ooh, that's grim. Oh, is it just me? I wonder. Yeah, I think it's just these headphones, actually. Wait a minute. Let me just try these other ones. Hello? Hello? I don't know if this works. Maybe it is just the headphones. What the fuck? What the fuck? I'll play something and see if that actually fixes it. Yep, that fixed it. Okay, it was my headphones, apparently. Huh. fine. Just check if it's still working. Yep, okay. These headphones are broken. One more, and if it doesn't work... Yeah, it doesn't work, okay. We'll come for you later, headphones. Well, that's unfortunate. Depressing to hear that the headphones died, but oh well. We can finish this now. The thing they noticed when the monster's face was cleaned, the mocking, unbelievable resemblance to a learned and self-sacrificing martyr who had been entombed but 3 days before. The late Dr. Alan Halsey, public benefactor and dean to the medical school of Miskatonic University. To the vanished Herbert West and to me the disgust and horror were supreme. I shudder tonight as I think of it. Shudder even more than I did when the morning when West muttered through his bandages. Damn, it wasn't quite fresh enough. Woo! He's been doing some spooky things, and the headphones broke. Well, that's peculiar and sad. Because, apart from that, it was going well. And then I said the word retarded. Oh, Lovecraft, you 18th century man. And your weird... That was the old usage of the word, by the way, I think. Which is like literal slowness of the brain. But, yeah, oh, Lovecraft, you silly boy. I'm going to check something. I'm just going to see if that works. Check the old headphones again. Plug in. Are you broken? Yes. Well, shit. That's fair. At least I can't hear the static anymore. Hopefully that when I come back and I listen to this, I don't realize like, oh wait a minute, the static also is coming through the headphones. Sick. Okay, so that was part 1 and 2 of Herbert West Reanimator. How many other parts we got? I'm just gonna check. Okay, we got 2 parts down. Pretty good. Okay, after that we got 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 more chapters. So we'll probably get through that in like 2 other sessions. Great! I'm happy to hear that! Yeah! Fuck! Wah! So upset! Wah! Okay. But in all seriousness, we've got another story to get to, and that is a Christmas story, because it's Christmas! Oh, it's so great! Oh, I'm very happy about Christmas. I am genuinely happy. It means I get to go home and see family, and that's good. Yeah, apart from that, let's get down to business. So, the next story we're going to have is a Christmas-themed one. I'm not sure what's going to happen in it. Hopefully it'll be fun. Maybe a little bit grim. Yeah. This is A Christmas Feast by Michael Whitehouse. Let's have a little ready, shall we? If I can just get the right music. Come on, where you at? There you go. Great. He first suspected that they were going to eat him when he noticed the distinct lack of Yuletide smells. It wasn't perhaps a conscious thought, at least not one that had been fully realized, but there was a clear, growing uneasiness within him. Somehow, He just knew. Surely, if a family invited you for Christmas dinner, the house would be filled with wondrous aromas associated with that annual feast. Succulent roast turkey, honey-glazed vegetables, perhaps the fumes of mulled wine or a brandy-covered Christmas pudding. But no, all of these were absent. Yet the table was set. It was a particularly bleak Christmas. And while snow was often welcome at that festive time of year, the penetrating cold and frost which seemed to sabotage both homes and their residents' bodies was not. The temperature plummeted on the 7th, and there had been little sign of the forthcoming reprieve. Families attempted as best they could to reach one another, but for many it was going to be a lonely Christmas day. Travel, especially for the elderly, was almost impossible for fear of slipping on the ice. One fall, and that was it. It was all it would take for a broken hip or a shoulder. And for the more fragile individuals amongst them, recovering from such an injury was not an easy task. Certainly not as easy it would be for those of a younger vintage. The Cardinal family had taken pity on an elderly gentleman who had recently moved into the neighborhood only a few streets away. They were of upstanding stock, and took part in a local home help initiative, spending time with the old and vulnerable. Everyone knew and loved them. Timmy was the youngest, a boy of only 5 or 6. He was a child whom all looked upon with great adoration, never complaining, never causing trouble, always adorable. And his 10-year-old sister Camilla was equally as admired. They were both a testament to the caring and nurturing parenting skills of Ben and Lucy Cardinal. Each year, as the cold winter drew in, the Cardinal family were admired for their dedication and commitment to those around them, their passion, almost zeal, for helping those who were less fortunate. But behind the smiles and the skin-deep facade of that loving family lurked a far more sinister purpose. They had a tradition each year, a way to reward themselves for their kindness and generosity, one which stemmed back through many previous generations of the Cardinal family. Each Christmas they would invite a guest for dinner who would be welcomed with open arms into their home, sat at a beautifully set table provided with humorous and enjoyable Christmas conversation, and then by the light of the roaring fire, the guest would be stabbed to death and eaten gratefully. They all revelled in the old tradition, with Timmy looking forward to the most. He had a ferocious appetite and a waistline to match it, but children do get so wrapped up in the anticipation of a family Christmas, and his parents were delighted to see a growing boy fill his belly. Camilla was more of a quiet disposition than her stout little brother, slight of figure with a pallid complexion which reminded all of her mother, but make no mistake, she adored eating with the family, and could render anyone silent with a sharp, cold insult. Ben was the local police chief of the area, so covering up their annual feast was quite the cinch, while Lucy was, shall we say, a relation of sorts, and was entirely enthusiastic about maintaining the Christmas tradition. Their guests were invariably those without family, and often of a ripe old age, forgotten by society, left to wither in their old, isolated little houses. Ben explained to the children yearly that it was almost a kindness to put the victims out of their slowly increasing misery. And besides, when they did eventually die, they would be shoved into a box in the ground and roasted to ashes. What a waste of good meat. This year, Timmy and Camilla were especially excited. It was all their mother could do to calm their nerves, but on that Christmas Eve it was nearly impossible, for they knew the special treat they were in for the following day. The Cardinals were hosting a most special guest. His name was Sergio Moreau. Oh, sorry about that. Moraru. There you are. And he hailed from Eastern Europe. They had never had foreign meat before, and the very idea of tearing into some delicious exotic model, in fact, made this year's feast something to really look forward to. They had met Old Man Moraru just a few weeks earlier when Ben had noticed the unusual name on his home help list. Every year, as Christmas approached, the volunteers at the local church would be given names and addresses of the pensioners in the area who had no family and would be left quite alone over the holiday season. At that festive time of year, and worried that many of the frailer residents might succumb to the biting cold, church committee members would visit each of these lonely individuals and offer a friendly ear, or a helping hand, and often some hearty food to put to the poorest of those on that list. The names would rarely change, but at least one person on the list would sadly pass away that year. Being an upstanding member of the community and a high-ranking police officer in the area, Ben would often inform the church that one of their flock had sadly passed away. With no friends or family known, he would concoct a lie, which usually involved a lost son or daughter, appearing to take their sadly departed parents somewhere far away to be buried. That, or he would say that they simply moved, having a bit of a deal with the local estate agent and solicitors, firm to throw the proceeds from any property sales their way. And their family were not without influence. It was incredible how little people questioned this, but as the Cardinals ensured that each Christmas meal was not an active member in the church or community, people just assumed Ben knew best. This year, the Cardinals had been hoping to invite Lucy Rindridge around for her Christmas swan song, but unfortunately she died during the summer, and Ben investigated and suspected that an intruder had been inside the house with her at the time of her death. But it seemed as though the causes were natural. No, the family would just have to have someone else for dinner. Then the name appeared on the list. Sergio Moraru, 86, slight emphysema, no family, knows no one in the area as he has only recently moved here. Perfect. Ben found Mr. Moraru to be an absolute delight. While he was obviously very frail, his mind was still sharp, and he regaled Ben with numerous colourful stories about the old country and the adventures he had while in the full bloom of youth. Of particular interest were his war stories, and Ben was thrilled to know that their main course would be that of an intelligent, well-travelled man. He even looked unlike any of the previous victims. He was quite tall, although slightly haunched with age and with a long, crooked nose, an intense stare. Ben fancied that in his youth, Moraru would have been quite intimidating. His kind smile and obvious fragile frame, however, left Ben in no doubt that the kids would love him. They enjoyed eating those with character and a gentle disposition. He always enjoyed the meat more if it had a keen mind and was out of the ordinary, as the family religion, one which had managed to stay unseen yet influential throughout the centuries, stated that eating another human being would transmit some of his strengths to those whom devoured it. As with many of those who can only look into the past rather than the future, Sergio Moraru enjoyed the company greatly and was touched when Ben invited him to sit at his family's Christmas table. The old man was extremely frail, and required the assistance of both Ben and Camilla to help him in and out of Ben's car, and then into the house. His emphysema was particularly bad that day, as each step was accompanied by the wheezing, fluid-filled sounds of struggling lungs. Each room of the Cardinal home was draped in a multicolored selection of rather crass Christmas decorations, with numerous cards adorning every visible panel, and a mantelpiece showcasing just how popular Ben and his family really were. The table was beautifully laid with a red cotton cloth resting underneath it, elegant creme dining set. The old man found that the rest of Ben's family were just as pleasant and congenial as he was. Timmy and Camilla were kind and very well behaved for their age, helping the frail old man to his chair carefully, and then waiting on him, topping up his drink as their mother and father busied themselves in the kitchen. Finally, Lucy appeared, carrying a huge centerpiece plate. It was unusually large, and as she sat it in the middle of the table, empty and devoid of food, old man Moraru caught a look on Lucy's face. It was brief, and he immediately attempted to disregard it as a product of his imagination, but it unsettled him deeply. It was as if a private joke had been passed between the eyes of Lucy and her children, a flicker of a grin, and not one of kindness or of Christmas spirit, but one rather resembling that of a conspiratorial bully, as if Sergio was the unwitting recipient of some unwholesome prank waiting to be ridiculed. Just as the unease began to diminish, Ben appeared with a large, jagged carving knife and a long, two-pronged fork, which reminded Sergio more of a butcher's implement than that required to cut a decent-sized turkey. A turkey which became increasingly conspicuous by its absence. They sat there for over an hour, each member of the Cardinal family replenishing the old man's drink with enthusiasm and showing concern for every and each cough or movement or uncomfortable breathing experienced by their guest. But it was a strange concern. They sat there gleefully, asking Moreau questions and then listening to the stories and answers which came about his life, where he lived, how many battles he had fought in. But the interest and concern seemed to be distant somehow. It was only skin-deep. Each time their guest mentioned the old country, those same conspiracy-laden glances were traded across the table, as if excited not only by the content of the stories, but rather than by the simple fact that Moraru was a foreigner. The absence of not only food, but that of a mere mention of it was unsettling enough, but what was more perplexing was Ben repeatedly stole looks toward an antique clock, which sat on a mantelpiece above the fire. Looks which were poorly hidden and betrayed their purpose. He was counting down the minutes to some event. While the old man had no idea what the event was, he certainly was apparent that it was not connected to anything cooking in the kitchen oven. Moraru knew there was no food being simply roasted, grilled, or even cooked on a window ledge nearby. Whatever was planned, it was not going to involve him eating a Christmas meal. It was Camilla who had stopped smiling first in his anecdotes and historical observations. She had ceased listening. No longer was she politely laughing at the obvious jokes and the unendearing sight of an old man repeating himself through forgetfulness. Camilla was simply staring with those cold, pinpoint, dark eyes, as a snake before a strike. Timmy was the next to abandon the act as they began to grin menacingly at Sergio as his hands gripped a small, serrated steak knife intensely. The most alarming thing was that the focus of Timmy's stare was not at the old man's face, but his wrinkled neck. With one last glance on the clock, Ben ceased being the jovial, attentive host and began to run his fingers along the huge carving knife in front of him with a mixture of anger and lust in front of his face. Sergio had seen many things in his time, but nothing as surprisingly strange and unnerving as this. Finally, when the clock came to chime, Lucy relinquished her false endearing shell and exposed the cold, hearted and twisted personality which lay beneath. As the Christmas chimes slowly rang throughout the house one by one, echoing and lonely and piercing in their symbolism, each of the cardinals rose from their seats, sharp, jagged knives in hand, and waited. The chime rang once, and they uttered an indecipherable phrase in unison. The chime rang twice, and they increased their cult-like chorus in ferocity and volume. The chime rang 3 times, and then they stopped. All was silent. The house devoid of sound, Christmas spirit, and that of hope. The old man's wheezing grew in intensity as the uniquely bizarre sight of the twisted family about to dine dawned upon Sergio. The family then quietly and efficiently walked about the dining table and stood motionless, surrounding their guest. Just as the old man was about to inquire what became of him, the clock struck on the mantelpiece burst into life one final time. The chime was different from the others. It was sharper, fouler, and echoed once and once only throughout the cardinal home. From behind, Lucy slit the old man's throat from ear to ear as Ben thrust his carving knife deep into Sergio's stomach. Both parents then removed their knives and stood back, watching with pride as Camilla cut and stabbed rapidly, while Timmy stuck his steak knife in and out of Moreau's legs, neck, and arms. After a few minutes, the frenzy diminished as both children grew tired, and with one last downward thrust, Timmy drove his steak knife so deeply into the old man's hand that it skewered it completely, embedding itself into the table on which the hand rested. The children now ran to the parents' collective embrace. They hugged and rejoiced in what was a fantastic Christmas game, and could now look forward with delight to some succulent exotic meat. Arms wrapped around each other, they stared at the victim and began to laugh loudly, commenting on the old fool stories of times gone by, the war, the old country. As they turned to each other once more, the laughter diminished, and they looked at each other's rosy, blood-covered faces and shared a family moment. This has been one of Ben's favorite sacrifices, but the laughter had not completely ceased. One person was still laughing loudly, and confusion turned to abject horror as they turned and found, and bizarrely, and the bizarre truth revealed itself. It was Mr. Moreau. Sitting covered in blood, his head tilted back in the deep cut in his throat wide open, the dinner guest laughed loudly and strong. A laugh which was both young and old. His head arched forward as he pulled Timmy's steak knife out of his hand, dropping into the floor. Camilla screamed as Lucy hid behind Ben. What they thought to be a corpse now stared at them all, as they had stared at it, with a singular purpose. Timmy began to cry, as two previously retracted fangs cracked through the old man's upper gum, revealing a serrated and terrifying grin. As he rose to his feet, Lucy fainted, and with both hunch and age now gone, the Cardinal's guest loomed tall and dark before them, his eyes piercing, telling tales of countries and decades and centuries of existence. Sergio Moreau ate well that Christmas. Plot twist! You ate a monster, doofus! How do you feel? Probably not so good. That was interesting. What could I say about that? What could I say about... I forgot to talk about friggin' the thing. That. I need to talk about that, what I thought of the first two chapters. I'm not sure if it's like, supposed to be one of those things where you, read it, a new series comes out each week or something like that, but it seems that, for Reanimator, Lovecraft completely repeated himself, despite the fact we just read what just happened. So I'm gonna hope that it's just telling the whole thing again, because it was written in a manner that was intended to be read over week and a week and a week, and it kept being released. What about Christmas Feast? Horribly gory, and very open about it. It was very, what do you call it? It was almost a very descriptive of what they were doing and how they did it. And I think that, I don't know, maybe they could have done more with this religion that they followed. They certainly could have done a heck of a lot more with Mr. Moreau, who was just some monster dude that they ate. That would have been more fun if there was more hints and more details about the old country. About maybe it's this place that I don't never heard of this place. It sounds completely foreign. Even to my standards, it sounds like you come from this really wacky place. What else? Too much gore. Too much. What is the word to describe it? Obviousness. It's very obvious, and again, would have been better if it was more like a Wikipedia article, descriptive, very, very descriptive, a very almost clinical sort of fashion in describing this, than it is as a general story, because it just shows that these guys are cannibals. And the tension is kind of busted in that final scene, because you know what's gonna happen, or at least you think you know what's gonna happen, because of course doesn't go that well. But that's the thing. Like, you think, of course, there is a twist at the end because you do know what's going to happen. But the twist kind of was underwhelming. They needed more on the monster. They needed more on that. If that was the case, would have been good. Would have been real good. Would have been freaking great. But it's just kind of okay. Kind of okay good. Very gory. Hopefully you didn't puke. Puke is bad. Either way, on that note, on a horrifyingly gory Christmas-related note, have a good Christmas yourselves. Don't get eaten by people. And don't reanimate corpses. Yeah. Merry Christmas. And, of course, stay spooked.